Great. Thanks, Christine. Hello, and thank you for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedules from teaching at home. I'm Susan Wu, a consultant from the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, and I'm also representing the Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortia, or ARPDC. We are very excited to be joined by one of the most outspoken and dynamic leaders in educational assessment, Rick Wormeli, for assessment and grading to support learning at home. Now, just to prove a point to Rick, because when I was chatting with him yesterday, I learned that I have been saying his name incorrectly for many years. So okay. What I'd like you to do is to press down on your space bar and say how you would normally say his last name. Okay, on a count of three. 1, 2, 3.
Wormeli.
Okay, great, thanks.
It's tsunami, or Italian, and Polish or something. I'm not sure which.
That's right. So thanks for that. So I just want to prove I was not the only one mispronouncing his name. So Rick is an experienced classroom and building educator who now writes professional articles and educational books while training teachers, principals, superintendents, business organizations, school boards, and parents in North America and around the world. With an emphasis on up-to-date pedagogy, innovation, and professionalism, Rick's work often focuses on the topics of assessment, feedback, differentiated instruction, leadership, literacy, motivation, cognitive science, linguistics, teacher-student relationships, racism, and creativity. So I just wanted to also acknowledge that we have 70 different school districts represented in our audience today. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us across the province. And we definitely have a large group today. So Rick will be doing approximately 90 minutes of instructional, and then we'll have a chance to do a Q&A in the chat box for the last half hour. So without further ado, I present you with Rick Wormeli.
Oh no, please, Susan, more ado. We need more ado these days.
All right.
This will stop the other screen sharing. So I was going to do screen sharing. I've pressed that, is that correct? And now I own the universe.
Yeah. He's
so
funny.
to speak.
Thank God.
But
2 hours a day, and then next week and the week after that. This stuff is awesome.
How do I gotta get see waiting. I'm getting all the announcements about the waiting room. So can I get rid of that and start or no? Because it's not allowing me.
Greg, can you hover at the bottom of your screen to share screen at the very bottom?
I did already.
Okay.
So let's try that one more time. Are you, let me just see, are you seeing my slides full screen?
No, I'm seeing them separately. Now we are.
Okay, so now you have the full screen?
That's correct.
Yay. All right. Well, I'm still getting the notifications for admitting to the waiting room, but I'm assuming Christine or Susan, you'll be able to take care of that?
Absolutely.
Yes, sorry, Rick. Yes, I had my microphone muted. You're good.
Okay, great. Well, you should see the back of my head because I look better from this angle. And that's me in my office here in Virginia. I'm assuming that's all clear. And Susan, you'll let me know if I'm off base with the slides. Okay, so when we start doing this, we really begin to see that there is a hybrid that we're going to share with you. One is going to be about assessment integrating principles in general, but we're going to be keenly aware of, how do we do that in the midst of our current reality? So know that's where my mind is as I walk you through this, and hopefully you'll share the path and you'll get some ideas about sharing things in conversation with others. A reminder that the brain is innately social. It requires a social interaction in order to clarify and really bring meaning and connection to what we're studying. So be thinking, with whom will I share this? And what kind of conversation do you want to have? And is there one conversation to have right now and maybe another one to have in the summer after we reflected on how we got through these frantic last few weeks of school? Yeah, there probably is. So as we look at this picture, we've got this idea of three different concerns about assessment and grading. One is literally, what do we know that is ethical and that is practical and represents modern pedagogical practice? Two, we have all the equity issues. Let me just, I'm gonna go ahead. You guys have still a full screen, right?
Yes, we do, Rick.
Okay, thank you very much. Because in mine, it's a split screen, and I just want to make sure that you're seeing something different than I am. Okay. So we've got this idea of equity, and that's equity of access, but also the emotional cycles of a family, whether it can be synchronous, asynchronous. Parents are now out of work. They're still in work. There's only one machine, or there's not machines. We can't get homework packets because that bus ride is just 60 clicks way beyond what we can get to in a reasonable way, more than just maybe once a week. But then we also have, what do we do right here, right now for assessment and grading just to get through the year? And then what are we really going to do if this extends for the full year next year? And at the very least, there will probably be a hybrid of that, which means that some kids will be able to attend school and some will not. I will pose to you, though, the big concern here is that absent an effective vaccine widely distributed, and just a reminder that once you do get a vaccine, it usually takes 2 to 4 weeks before it's effective. So if we were to get a vaccine by, I don't know, July, it would still be September before you could start. But when you look at virology and pathology and the way vaccines are developed over the years, 2 years down the road is stunningly ambitious and very short. So for us having the whole world working together on one thing like this, that's pretty amazing. And miracles can happen. Wonderful things can happen. But I am very doubtful that we will be in physical buildings in the fall unless we enter into some kind of alternating schedule. Half the kids come one day, half another day, or something along those lines. And it might take a real finagling to pull that off. And it might require money that we simply don't have. So I am suggesting that over the summer when things are calmer, you might want to have a gentle conversation with one another about, all right, what if this is long-term for the next school year? What are we going to do about assessment and grading, let alone instructional design when it comes to that? So that's a larger concern. Creating maybe a larger umbrella on all of this is something to think about in the weeks ahead. So what's helpful? What can we possibly do? Well, let me turn now to the very first slide. I always offer parents when doing a evening seminar. Sometimes a superintendent of a school division or a headmaster of a private or independent school will invite me in and say, let's do some training for mom and dad. And my usual response is, be careful what you wish for. Because once they find out what this really is, this outcomes-based or standards-based or evidence-based criterion reference grading, they wonder, well, what do you mean? I thought my child's teacher was doing this all along. It seems very ethical, very wise. It creates an accurate report. Well, I want my child transferred to another teacher's class who actually does this. So it's a little bit of outrage at first, and first surprise, and then a little bit of anger. So let's take a look at what we mean. It means literally you get more information. It's far more communicating, far more clearly, but you really have information you can use that will tell you the degree to which Junior actually understands capitalizing proper nouns, understands the dual nature of light as both particle and wave. All those elements you see down below. It is not something like this. Ancient Rome test, 89%. That's not communicative. That's not clear. And it could be very widely teacher to teacher to teacher for a myriad of variables. So we want to be very careful. Are we increasing communication accuracy? We're lessening the muddying of the waters. We're minimizing that. That's the goal the whole way, is communication. But we might run into one of these. I hope you don't want to have one of these in your high school. You know, looking down a middle, sometimes there are individuals like this in middle school looking down on the elementary and primary grades. And then sometimes there are primary teachers like this who are blaming the gene pool from which the child comes. This is not a lot of fun, blaming the level below. So it's interesting how this works. You will get in the middle of a high school, you will get teachers who will say, yeah, that might work with the math department, but let me tell you, those English teachers aren't going to swallow it at all. But geographically, right next door, it's reversed. The English teachers love it. The math teachers really are frustrated by it. They don't like it at all. But then you also have from level to level. That might work in elementary, but this is middle school or junior high. Let me tell you right now, it's not going to work. Folks, you should not be thinking that way. You shouldn't be spending time with me. Don't go to conferences. I'm grading an assessment. Don't go to assessment things. Don't do the training unless it holds value for all levels. What I'm sharing with you today is universal. It's surprising how people see that. But I do this almost exact same content for transitional kindergarten, preschool, first grade teachers, all the way up through college, university professors, and everybody in between. The principles hold up. In fact, so much so, I think they should be applied to teacher evaluation. So for example, if we talk about descriptive feedback, which we will mention later, I think that principals, administrators should be doing descriptive feedback for teachers. They are that valuable. If we say we're evidence-driven, this is based on evidence of your teaching proficiency, not things outside of that that might distort the accurate report of your teaching proficiency, then we do that with teachers. Well, teachers then will do that with students. If teachers feel the positives and the ethics and the efficacy really of what you want them to do with students, they feel those positives, they're way more likely to do it with students. We all feel that way. Now, here's a problem though. We have from time to time, the teachers in the last few levels of elementary or primary grades, they realize they're getting their kids ready for the levels above. Middle school doing the same thing, preparing for high school preparing for career training, university level or military, kind of the three general directions a lot of people go, usually post-high school. And they say things like, well, they're not going to do it at that level, so we're not going to do it here because we got to get them ready. This is a false assumption that you must recreate the policies and practices of the level above in this lower level that you currently teach as the best way to prepare them for that level. Simple truth is the best preparation for the level above is really learning the stuff right here and now, and personal maturation. Because I'll tell you, incompetence in the current material is never preparatory or maturing. So we don't give car keys to a toddler because one day she will drive. We do what is developmentally appropriate right here, right now. This is so paramount because so many people in the grading world kind of hide behind this. No, we're not allowed to differentiate assessments. No, we're not allowed to do redos because we got to get them ready. You are getting them ready by making sure they learn time management by going through the redo experience. You're getting them ready to make sure that they don't, limit their future based on they're not willing to drink the water, so to speak, dive into the learning, invest in it right here, right now. So I wrote an article on this, just dedicated to this idea that we don't sacrifice sound instruction because they're not going to get any of the higher level. So it's like saying you're going to be miserable later, so you're going to make you miserable now, so you're in misery all the way through. Not cool, not professional. So we sent that article out ahead of time. I hope you got a chance to read it. But if not, feel free to read it. But you can always go to rickwormeli.com/articles, and then you can look it up there. This is kind of the mindset. So as we move forward, we're beginning to think about principles that will actually help us gather the solutions for the really uncomfortable challenges that face us. There is no book. There's no TED Talk to inspire you. There's no video. Nobody's stuff will tell you how to answer every single grading issue that comes up, especially in a world that we're just kind of making it up as we go along right now because we've never faced this extraordinary situation. That's fine, but get the principles first and you will be able to find a lot of those practical solutions. One of the mindsets Tom Guskey says really well. Let me just set it up and then I'll be quiet so you can read the slide. I won't insult you by reading from the slide, but I'll expect you to be so professional just to actually read the slide when I send you off to it. Here's the basic setup. Do you think students should be sorted to see who has stars upon theirs, you sneeches? Who is worthy? Who is not worthy? I must select and sort among you. Well, you might see grading as that, the sorting mechanism, or grading as a way to cultivate and develop students and their talents. One of these ways is a place I would not like to have my own children. If you have children, I hope you would not like to have your children there. And a weak, ineffective teacher exacerbates it most of all. So let's take a look at both slides. I'll leave them each up for about 10 to 15 seconds. Give them a read. You decide, would you like to have children in such a class? Take a look at the first one. And the second. There's the thing. Imagine if every child in any class, any grade level, got straight 4.0s, 100%, A's, O for outstanding, smiley face, whatever your scale is that you use. They got the top score. What would your reputation be? Chances are you're really soft. You allow cheating to happen. Negative things. But the very thing that teachers are lifting up as a negative could be teaching nirvana or heaven. It could be a sign that learning and teaching happen unusually well. A bell curve distribution of grades, as if we're like a fair distributor of these grades, is a sign that over half the class did less than desirable. Something major went wrong, not a preferred status. The goal should be every single kid gets an A or a 4.0 or 100 on everything. It won't happen. Reality gets in the way. We run out of runway, school calendar. We run out of resources. Different factors intersect. I totally get that. But the goal is not, here's all the stuff, sink or swim. While I document all your deficiencies for all the stakeholders in your life. Come back tomorrow for more of the same rejection. No, it'll be fun. You'll like it. That's not teaching. We teach so that they learn the stuff, not to play gotcha. I'm hoping you would see what we're about to talk about through the prism of what is going to lead to student success, what's going to lead to the learning. Not that I caught them and held them accountable. Yes, accountability will happen, but the goal is the kids learned it. And frankly, the Yale Business School Management definition of accountability in an article I read a long time ago was mutual ethos. I'm looking out for you and you're looking out for me. I'm looking out for your success. You're looking out for my success. So teacher to student, I don't condescend to you, but for you, I make sure you have a seat at learning's table. I honor what you bring into the learning equation. And that's how I'm looking out for you. I'll try to make it relevant and help you see how it transforms your life. Give you the things you really need, mediate relevance. I will do that. I am all in, invested entirely on you and where you're coming from. But you try to do the things I'm asking you to do because you're committed to my success as your own educator. That's a much more constructive look at accountability than the political one. I'm going to get them and their little dog Toto too. Well, we're not going to go all Wizard of Oz on them. So if somebody like a cynic, a skeptic, a naysayer might say, what is this outcomes-based, evidence-based, criterion reference, standards-based grading all about? Really, truly, all it is assessing and grading against evidence of a standard or an outcome or whatever you're going to use as your reference. Now, I do get people who push back on this from time to time. And I say, okay, fine. I would love to debate you another time. You don't want to do standards-based grading. What is that? You think it's too reductive. It doesn't really prepare responsibility. It doesn't reflect the larger working world. Got it. If you don't want to do that standards-based, then what would you grade against? What would be your reference? And they always say, well, the curriculum you're hired to teach. Your lesson goals and objectives, that's what you grade against. And my response is, those are standards and the outcomes within that we intend as look-fors from those standards. That's what they are. Nobody on earth disagrees with this. So what's the hiccup? What will be the potential issue? It requires us to stop doing things if we weren't hypocrites. It requires us to stop doing things that heretofore we thought were legit and to start doing some things that before we didn't think were so legitimate. That's the rub. That it would require change. And so many of us are so used to being very confident, it's uncomfortable to be that beginner, to be not knowing or taking fragile first steps in a new area. But I invite you to do it. no pressure, but whole futures, very real lives, our students' lives are at stake. We need to get this right and not just fall back on, well, it was done to me and supposedly I'm okay as an adult, so we're just going to do it to them. That's not what professionals do. So based on what I've just said, what do you think these might have in common? I'll give you a moment. All right, if you're saying there, I know you're muted right now, that's okay, but if you're sitting there thinking maybe, well, they're not indicative of academics. Got it. Yep. They're more about compliance. Yep. Yep. You're exactly right on all of those. But unfortunately, they've all been used to falsely raise a grade or lower a grade. So here's what you know about all the operations with decimals. Great. You know how to multiply, divide decimals, or maybe it's fractions or whatever you're teaching at the time. Plus all the days you were quiet and used an indoor voice. Plus the neatness of your notebook. Plus all the days you practice personal hygiene successfully. But next time, Junior, a little less of your brother's axe would go a long way. Thank you. Thank you for that. You brought your supplies in a timely manner. You had your homework completed. Whatever that is, those are, some of them I would say, are important to kids' work habits, to their growth and maturity, to the success in the subject. Great. But we can't conflate the report of one thing with a report of something else. So I've lost count of the number of times that previous year teachers who I now have their students this year, they've come up where they've only learned about 75 to 80% of the curriculum. Rock solid, they got it. But they got 100 in the class, a full A or 100% because they did homework and had the nice, neat notebook. I have read most provinces' curriculum standards. I've also read every single one for the United States. And let's just stick with mathematics. It was a part of my doctoral program. I know I need to get a life. Sadly, I did it with 5 different topics, but let's just stick with math for the moment. In no province and no state does it say kindergarten through 12th grade has a nice, neat notebook, at least as far as I found, because that's not a math principle. They want to know if you understand slope, y-intercept, graphing inequalities, the role of the mantissa in a logarithm. Talk to me about that. So you rally around the learning, not the things you did to get to the learning. That's an incredibly different prism through which to see all this stuff. So if we're doing virtual learning where they're learning at home, that means we have to worry about what are they learning? And the grade is a measure of that, not what did they do? That's a very different thing. I can't mix the report of obedience, compliance, completion with the report of what you know about parts of a plant. And I'm hoping you would see that. It's just as I wouldn't associate your capacity to park beautifully in those parallel parking lines in the parking lot in every morning and to leave in a wonderful, perfectly lined up manner as you leave the parking lot as a representation or evidence of your teaching proficiency. Those are very different things. You can't conflate the two. I'm going to caution us to be very careful because it's going to get easy to say things like, well, the student participated. I don't really care if you participated or not. I'm not going to knowingly falsify the grade. When you knowingly falsify a grade, you distort the truth. What's that word we use in North America for distorting the truth? Oh yeah, lying. And none of us have moral authority to lie to children, to their parents, to stakeholders, to business leaders, to say that these children are competent when really they're not, to buffer a grade higher or lower. This is a huge problem. So we give them the grade that speaks to academics and we give them a separate grade that speaks to work habits. A lot of folks throughout Alberta have already picked up on this and they're cool. But what we find on close examination is they do allow some things that are not indicative of the real evidence they're assessing to creep into it. For example, the student knows the material but can't represent it on the format we were actually administering to the class. That's a problem. I need to get a different vehicle, conveyance mechanism to deliver that evidence. I really don't care if you take the test. I'm not giving you a grade for taking a test. I'm not going to give you 10 points for putting your name at the top just so I can make sure the math calculates comfortably. I'm going to give you a grade for the evidence of the standards represented on that test. So I don't know if you picked up on this, but we could have this conversation and we could present I don't know, causation, correlation, limitations of the study. Bar graphs, baby. We could channel John Hattie, maybe Bob Marzano, do some meta-analyses of thousands of studies. We could do all of that stuff, and it doesn't change much. It's an intellectual abstraction. However, if we talk about logistics, mechanics, principles, and research, but we also talk about ethics and morality of what we do, suddenly people are willing to be candid and transform. A critical examination of pedagogy transforms. An unexamined look at pedagogy, students wither. There's not much for them. So we want to be comfortable with that. Many of you know the great researcher, author, educator, Doug Reeves. He's become a friend over the years. But he said this about 30 years ago, and it really transformed our thinking. Absent a moral imperative, nothing changes. I think it is okay in these times for people to lean into the virtual camera on Zoom or Google Hangout or GoToWebinar or meeting, whatever you're using, 2 cups and a string. It doesn't matter. You can feel the vibrations of passion and say, is this the moral thing we do? That is probably one of the most important questions we can ask at this moment. And then we can get into the mechanics and logistics. But absent that understanding that this is a moral endeavor, many teachers don't maintain the fortitude, the energy to really try to focus on making the principles manifest. What they do is they realize, oh, that's a really nice thing. Yeah, I'd like to do that, but I don't see how to do that. And they don't put the energy into that, and they just kind of give up. Just because we can't fathom logistics doesn't mean we drop that principle. I hope that you'll be mindful that it's a little bit beyond just the mechanics of how do we set up our grade book or what do we do if a kid doesn't deliver something by a certain date. It's beyond that, this great enterprise we do. And I hope that helps give some of you a little bit more oomph in your movement forward with this. So we're going to get all kinds of questions as we move to this learning at home moment. Is it appropriate to grade participation, effort? No. Is it appropriate to allow students to raise their grade? We won't allow anybody to lower their grade, but you are allowed to do some stuff and improve your grade upon where it was when we all left on March 1st or whenever your date happened to have been. Well, I'm going to say no to both of these. The first one, I've already made the case, knowingly falsifies the grade. But the second is about inequity. Those kids who have a family life where they cannot actually raise their grade, now it is unfair to them. The one caveat I would say is this. If you keep your grades open, now right now you might deliver a progress report, a moment in time report card, here's your grade. But you say, not just over the summer, but into the next school year, we will allow you to go back and represent evidence from that particular curriculum in that last third or fourth of this particular school year, that content. And if you represent that evidence to the satisfactory degree, we will go back and change the grade from that level. That might be legitimate in terms of equity because they have longer time, but they would also need support, the relearning or the extended learning to get to that point. That's fine. In general, however, if you're not going to do something along those lines, it would be inequitable to allow some students to raise their grades when others didn't have an opportunity or a fair shake to do that. Now, you can see that morality happening quite a bit. What about group projects? Yes, just go on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram. You will see so many wonderful student projects where they actually work together on things and we're able to present. But here's the weird thing. Spencer Kagan, Robert Slavin, Johnson & Johnson, the biggest names in group projects, collaborative efforts, and all the folks in project-based learning where there's multiple kids working on one thing, interdisciplinary coming together, they will be among the first to tell you, you never use a group project to assess any one child against any one standard or learner outcome. What you really need to do is a trust but verify. What that means is you will do an assessment after that experience to see what they pulled away from it individually. So if I have this group project and we're delivering slides of some sort on some media platform, and this one child does this group of slides, this child does this group, this child does that group, kind of a jigsaw all coming together, and there's our presentation. You really don't know what each one of them learned. And the grade is a report of what the individual child learned. So understand what I'm saying here, and I'll put it in a different framework. If it's a teacher technique or a learner method, It's not usually mentioned in the course curriculum, the course description, the list of standards, the outcomes expected underneath, all of that. So what does that mean? It can't be included in the academic report. Now, you might have very clear standards and outcomes for collaboration, working in groups. In today's world, that stuff is vital. I'm so glad you have that in your curriculum, but that's separate from what they know about this thing over here, about this historical event. So we're going to mark that, we're going to report that differently than we would with the groups, the academic material. So think about that. Reading log minutes, band practice minutes. I know that band is not that popular, but boy, it is here in the States. Music programs, showing up to play in a concert. I can't give you a grade for showing up. I give you a grade for the musical dynamics you demonstrate, because that's what it says in my course description. I'm not grading you on participation or compliance, although I might have a thing called musicianship. And it's the degree to which you contribute to the larger whole. And it demonstrates kind of professionalism. You clean your instrument, you practice so you can carry your portion of the concerto. That I can grade because that's part of musicianship. So just be very, very careful. Is this just a technique or a method as opposed to the thing I'm literally supposed to be grading? It will help guide you what's going on. So all throughout this, I'd like you to consider being principle first, practical second. I found so many people, they hear a webinar like this, they participate, or they go to a live face-to-face training, or they read a book, and they get one good idea, and then they take it back and they try it, whether or not it was warranted, and it bombs. It just dies. And they become the Eeyore of the faculty. You know the Eeyores. It's my birthday. Nobody remembered. This will just pass like an educational kidney stone. I'll wait it out. Well, those people really drag down learning, let alone the whole faculty. Or the reverse, the overzealous. They try one of these ideas out, whether or not it was warranted, and it just happens to work as a fluke, and then they demand the whole faculty now has to do it. That's just as bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify, hey, what are the principles at play here? And now I'll figure out my solutions, rather than rely on some educational consultant to come in and blow lots of sunshine around, or look up in a handout someplace to see if it was even addressed at all. So I'm begging you, please don't see what we're talking about or the books on grading assessment as just recipes for your teacher cookbook. It's so much more. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking. And yes, I provided this picture just to remind us of what we're missing and what we can look forward to. And it's still worth striving, getting back to normal and revisiting with our kids just as soon as we can. So if I'm saying principles, let's just pretend like there's some example that came up. Now, we sent out to you the draft. It was the final draft from my computer of chapter 2 from my book, Fares and Ours Equal, 2nd edition. I will send it out to anybody who's just listening and never got that. No problem. Just email me when I give you the email address and say, Rick, I'd like chapter 2 from your new book. That's fine. This comes from that. This is the Reader's Digest version, not the lengthy version. But basically choose any scenario that you come across. So it could be a child who reads 3 grade levels below, but actually understands content on the grade level. How do I grade that kid when I ask him to do a reading of something and answer questions? Well, there's lots of things we can do with that. Here's one where we have English language learners, or whatever your community might refer to them, that group of people where English is not their first language, and they're really struggling, perhaps even new to an English-speaking country as they sit in your classroom this year. All right, what do? I always go back to those principles I identified. Many teachers have never taken the time to write out their grading principles. It is transformative. I'm telling you, it's one of the better things you can do. And it's worth a faculty meeting or department or grade level meeting or 3 to actually do that. Your top 12 grading assessment principles or teaching principles, it works. But here's a situation. I've got English language learners and I want to assess and grade them ethically because I'm an ethical guy. So I will never knowingly falsify a grade. If I think I'm doing something that would limit the accurate portrayal of what a child knows, I'll stop doing that thing, whatever it is. Second big news, I will never use a grade that I think has been fudged, distorted, away from accuracy to make a high stakes decision. The jury will disregard the witness testimony, so to speak. I know sometimes the toothpaste is out of the tube and it's hard to disregard some knowledge you have, but if I think that knowledge is to any degree false, higher or lower, I will try my very best to disregard it as I try to make the focused, hopefully constructive, effective decision for that child. And then third one here, yeah, regular report cards are a contract between parents and schools. We think you're teaching this. This is supposed to be a report of this stuff we think you're teaching. So if you include something that is outside the course description that has been so publicized to all the teachers, all the parents, all the business leaders, admissions officers for universities, if you actually include something in the grade, I'm thinking that's knowingly distorting the truth of the report of what we think is being reported. So I'm going to suggest you actually report above and beyond exceeds expectations in a separate column or a separate addendum. I have lost count of the number of teachers who sent me screenshots, minus the student's name to protect confidentiality, of course, but screenshots where the child has straight 100s or A's or 4.0s, yet the child got a B on the report card. They were excellent in all things, wonderful, but they came in second from that. And I'm going to suggest that's knowingly distorting it because, well, Tom Guskey, Susan Brookhart, many others have talked about this. Tom Schimmer has talked about it, Myron Dweck to some degree, Ann Davies has talked about this, where you can't calibrate what is evidentiary consistently across the entire subject layer. So all the subject-like colleagues who teach that same thing, right? We can't say, well, what do you think is above and beyond? What do you think is above and beyond? It differs dramatically. And you get students like, well, I want to be in that teacher's class, not that teacher's class. And the parents complain. And it becomes inequitable again. The greater way to go is, one, become very good at making the implicit explicit. No guessing what's on the teacher's mind. Do your very sound best on that. And then realize this. If you have like 4.0 or A or 100, it's only if you exceed expectations, those are literally different standards. So they must get a separate report. They're not the same standards. So report these standards. You get a 4.0 because you nailed it. But they're not just promotional benchmark minimums. They literally are excellent. So intellectual agility, skillful versatility, they really have to be dynamic, multifaceted, be demanding. And if they nail it, they get the top score. But if they're outside of that, then a separate column. And here's how you do with accelerated advanced material of some sort. That's fine. And now you're far more communicating. What is our role? To communicate clearly, not muddy the waters. Yes, I stand apart from Bob Marzano on this. Bob Marzano is wonderful. He has so many wonderful things. Please look at his stuff. But this is one place where I disagree. And I would suggest to you this. Every other author whose books line our shelves, with whom I have had extended conversation. So Ken O'Connor, again, Myra Dweck, Tom Schimmer, Ann Davies, Susan Brookhart, Tom Guskey, Leanne Young, all these different people, Damian Cooper, all these different people. We've talked about these things and we kind of all agree that's inappropriate, that 3.0 is just meats. It should be the 4.0. This is something for you to wrestle with back home, but it's something to consider here. And the last one is, if the test format doesn't allow for an accurate grade, I have a moral duty to change the test format, not if I have time or I'm in the mood. Now, see top bullet. I can't knowingly falsify a grade. This is me being principled. The next slide is just principles with English language learners in general. For example, the second bullet, just because you lack the English proficiency to understand and translate properly from my language, English, into yours, Urdu, Farsi, whatever it might be, and then come up with a response that fully fleshes out what you truly know and understand about it, I can't diminish your grade. I have to find a way for you to be able to express accurately what you know. That is my obligation, my mutual ethos between you and me. I will do that. This is a teacher being principled first, practical second. So after you figure out your principles, only then can you identify your policies and actions. Hope that makes a little bit of sense. Now, let's get into some of those principles. A reminder that we're not going to hide behind the master schedule design. We're not going to hide behind the school calendar. Kids pop at different rates, just like popcorn. So I get a piece of popcorn that pops in the first 40 seconds as I'm popping it in a skillet. We're way beyond just throwing it in the microwave and stinking up the faculty room. You know who you are, teachers, that do that. At any rate, the first one pops, Wow, fully formed. This is great. But a minute later, the rest of them start popping. Well, those that pop later aren't lesser souls. They're just as legitimate. They get privileges, rights granted thereof. So a student doesn't learn it this day, but learns it 3 weeks later or 3 months later. Who cares? You were hired, I was hired to teach so that students learn. Again, not to play gotcha by one arbitrary calendar date imposed on the next generation. A grade is a report of evidence as of one calendar date. That's it. And as such, it's temporary at best. It can be overturned giving subsequent evidence. Many of you have seen this cartoon. We know there's a lot of different students. Everybody get up in the tree. That would be very unfair. The next 5 slides you do not have because they're student work and only have permission to show them to you live in a presentation, but not really to send them out in a handout. So ready? A student drew how each animal got up in the tree. Well, for the monkey, that was an easy test. Monkey climbs up the tree. The elephant, it was a pulley system and a counterweight. Check out the headphones on the ears. The fish in the fishbowl. That's how the fish got up there. Next one is my favorite. Circus cannon. Woohoo! Yeah. Check out the A+ on the helmet. And then the dog just climbs right up. Each animal takes a different route. Might be more time, less time, more support, less support, different avenue. This is irrelevant. Where is the grade in this equation? It's what you know it can do at journey's end, not how you got there. Couple more principles as we go forward. You're not going to hide behind time. It's not an absolute. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't matter when you learn it. The jump you see in front of you, if you just type in Dr. Tay and skateboarding, it'll come up on YouTube. He's a skateboarding champion, but also a physics professor. And he describes how to learn a skateboarding trick. And he's doing it on school property, actually, right outside the school. One of the quotes in there, though, is this. Nobody knows ahead of time how long it takes anyone to learn anything, but schools are predicated on that notion as if we did. And that gets in the way of a lot of things we're doing with learning at home. The child didn't turn it in on Friday. What do? You find a way for him to turn it in after Friday. But it was so important, it's worth following up on that. We don't get bogged down on the date of its turning in as actually influencing the report of what a child has learned about the topic. It means, too, this is a scary slide, that we're going to put previous curriculum on subsequent tests as much as we can, as much as reasonable. So, yeah, the test is on the moon, but 5 months ago we did that plant unit. I'll put plant questions on the moon test. I've had children take the test and suddenly they look up. Number 7 is, please explain the xylem and phloem, the vascular system of a plant. And they look up and go, Mr. Wormeli, that was 5 months ago, that plant stuff. This is a moon test. You were cutting and pasting without proofreading. No, you need to know it. I intended that. What? We have to know it now? Yes, you do, junior. And the most common response I get back, high school down to elementary, is this. Ready? Dang. That's it. That's all I've got. They're just shocked. They can't believe it. Wait, let me just back up. I forgot. What if they once knew it on the earlier test and they don't know it anymore? The grade goes down. Now, that sounds like I'm an ogre, really mean, and the parents are going to call and complain. But I'm going to fight for, I will be accurate. And one dad to another, what is a greater gift we give our children? Are you asking me to knowingly lie and distort the truth? It's what the child carries forward and could do independent of all assistance. That is the testimony for a grade, and it is the testimony for a teacher, not what they demonstrated and then forgot. So I will have integrity. So at the end of the year, I'll go back and I'll reassess stuff from the beginning of the year. I can't do everything because one test would take 3 weeks to take the test. But I will do the 4 to 8 power, essential learner outcomes, the most leveraging of what is the most indicative of our discipline. For those, I will fight. And I'll constantly spiral back and see if you carried it forward. Now, if we subsequently find out you don't know it, I'll totally let you go back and relearn it and be assessed and accredited anew, but on your time. If I have time to help you, I'll be glad to do that because I basically think I have 9.5 months to teach you all this stuff. We have curriculum overload as it is. It is physically impossible to teach everything that we are mandated to teach and do justice by it and ready for this one, call it mastery, proficiency, competent at that. Those are very elusive terms. We make up definitions just to satisfy ourselves so we can sleep guilt-free at night. But for right here, right now, we're asymptotes, educationally speaking. We approximate the goal. We get really close. We're aspirational to that. And I'm going to tell you, we want to keep rallying back to make sure they're carrying it forward. Now, that also means we're going to be evidence-based. What does that mean? It means if I walk into your classroom and I say, hey, how's Lakeisha or Umbar or Iqbal doing in your class? I better not hear you say, well, she or he is above average. Why? Your average might be way down here. That's pretty much a norm reference, how you're doing in relation to classmates. What are we? How are they doing in relation to the learning target, the learning goal? That's the thing. So whether it's grade 2s, grade 8s, grade 10s, it does not matter. You're rallying around the learner outcomes for that. And looking at the documents from the ministry there for Alberta, it did see that they were rallying around the learning, not that students did things. This is a fundamental idea. So when you use a rubric or a grading scale, it better not say anything like below average or above average or averagidity, if that was a word. It says, hey, they're relatively proficient to this, to this, to this. Here's the degree of those things. Again, this is just a sequence of principles that lead us up to, now, how do we really respond in this learning at home moment? I like to show this slide. You know, towards the end of the day, I did a lot of work with the giant squid studies and expeditions at the Smithsonian over a number of years. This is a lab I designed on dissecting squid. We sold this as a t-shirt. The student's caption, got milk. And we sold a lot of t-shirts. But look to the right. That's what I want to emphasize there. Just want to make sure you're awake at the, well, mid-afternoon for you guys, is that we are reporting learning, not doing. So look at your grade book as you're trying to keep these grades. Does it say things like page 26, 1 through 10? Did the ARC project, whatever it was, did test 1. That's not evidence-based. That's activity-based. That's really emphasizing compliance. We would say, as we used before, practice dividing decimals April 7th, or demonstrate the following learner outcomes, and they'd get a score for that, not the vehicle used to represent that evidence. Remember, we're not conflating compliance with mastery. And I know what you're thinking when you look at that statue. You're thinking, Rick, quit stalling. Stalin, yeah, yeah. I would do that, except that's Lenin. I am too funny for Alberta. But that picture is just funny. Look to the left. Every time we've advanced and really understood assessment, grading, and teaching and learning, it's because we overcame the current metaphor that was limiting our thinking at that time. Nobody around the world, for example, thinks a child is a blank slate. So we're going to try to transcend the metaphor. And I'm going to suggest you will get so many cool ideas and practical solutions to how to grade under this situation, let alone in the long term, by letting go of seeing grades as affirmation, validation, compensation, or reward, and turning to grades as accurate report, accurate communication of evidence presented as of one date. So we're no longer going to say he earned an 80 on that. He earned a B on that. Grades aren't earned. They're just a report of evidence as of one date. Oh, we're no longer going to barter with children. We're not going to say, if you do this, I'll give you an A. If you do this, I'll give you a B, like we're exchanging goods. That's not the way to see it. It will be very hard to do proper, ethical, accurate grading if you continue to see grades as a reward. Affirmation and reward will come. They now have freedoms, rights, privileges granted to those who have achieved, or they're denied those things. And we lead them in a reflective practice to see what they've done. What decision did you make that led to this success? This is being principled in your grading. Change that metaphor. Fair isn't always equal. Somebody shared a book with that title very soon. Oh, wait a minute. I did. Shameless plug in case you didn't recognize it. But look in the left and right. These are students in my classes over the years who are actually taking high stakes final exams. I know they look very alternative, but alternative doesn't mean superficial, foo-foo fluff. It means way more demanding. So they have to present some kind of proposal that I can approve of an alternative way to represent the same evidence, or I will come up with some of those ways too from time to time. So I'm suggesting you can have very traditional assessments, even so much so where they take a basic test, do a basic thing they could do in the classroom, and they take a picture of it and send it in to the postal service or by email or whatever method you want to use. That could be like that, as opposed to always an online app that's so technologically savvy. On the left side, those are students who had to research modern debate issues and then research historical figures and then portray the historical figures as they were trying to debate as the person would have debated that modern debate issue. In case you're wondering, that's Rosa Parks having words with Bob Dylan. And then they break character and explain to the audience, because we do a live one during the school day and one at night for parents and the Rotary Club and so on. They have to explain what they found in their research that made them think this person would have responded that way. That's a high stakes final exam. And I find out more about what they know in that than I do in a lot of traditional formats. To the right, the child has an open book, so it's not a test of recall. It's a test of can you find evidence to back up your claim, but he's using assistive technology and he's eating and snacking right in the middle of the test. Yes, there'll be anarchy. Desks will topple. No, it turns out students in grade 4 through grade 12 have to eat every 90 minutes or you lose cognitive focus, and the kids can't handle it without making a mess. I hope that all of you will be opening in your classrooms to drinking and eating in the middle of the class. So take a look at just these last few principles, and then we'll get to the really intense part here about assessing and grading and all the principles we can carry forward then into a learning at home moment. But you see that disaggregation is now newly important. It was important all along, but wow, is it particularly important now? All that stuff I taught in one 9-week quarter. I don't care if you teach this subject or not. Is that a lot? Yes. But the grade the child gets, B. Good, Elliot. If you don't recognize what I just said, no Reese's Pieces for you. Well, this B means nothing. It's too much aggregated into one tiny symbol. It's not meaningful, not valid for any one of those particular things. Well, the root of differentiated instruction is responsive teaching. It's an emphasis in the modern pedagogical era. What do I know about students and how do I use that, how to respond to that to improve the learning over that which otherwise could have been achieved instead of a one-size-fits-all canned program? So this is from Bob Marzano. I love it. Unidimensionality. Uni meaning one, dimension meaning domain. So student 1 does terrible in the first domain. Great in the second one. His score is 12. Student 2 does reverse. His score is 12. Student 3 does mediocre on both. Her score is 12. By the sameness of my vocal inflection, I'm trying to prove a point. All the kids get 70, 70, 70, 70, but they tell a dramatically different story. If you were a conscientious, responsive teacher and you saw this disaggregation layout of what really happened, you would respond differently to each child there. Different in instructional design, different in feedback, different in documenting progress. Well, now let's have the rubber hit the road. Here are 4 students with 5 pretend language arts or English elements or areas. Student A, this is the bar graph that represents student A's performance. Put your heads together for about 20 minutes, I bet. You'd come up with the average. What is it? Shout it out so I can hear you in Virginia. Yes.
70.
70. I heard that.
70.
Well done. All right. So 70. Wait a minute. Okay. But student B, whoa, totally different profile. I should respond very differently to that child than I do to the first child. Student C, conveniently absent every time there's a writing test. Mom calls it mental health day. We call it enabling. We're going to have a conversation. Student D loves his science fiction, fantasy, role play online and reading fiction books. Carries one everywhere all over campus. Well, you know where I'm going with this. If I did the average for every single one of these, what would it be? 70, exactly. And that means I'd be distorting the truth. I wouldn't know how to respond. So my suggestion to you is, are you making your assessment revelatory? Reveal story, revelatory. There's your fun mnemonic for the time. And are you moving away from averaging or that aggregate and to other forms of central tendency? If you have to do a central tendency, mode and median are actually superior to that. We can get into that if you like at some point. But we're talking about principles here and not just hiding behind the math that is easy to calculate, but doing the math that is meaningful, that actually creates an accurate report. Because what's our bottom line again? Communication. So if you're truly evidence-driven, criterion reference, outcomes focused, you're going to get evidentiary. Have a smile reading this. Yeah, I'm not just up for recitation and training good parrots. So do you remember when people used to call out a spelling word list, 10 or 20 words on a Tuesday or a Friday, depending when folders went home, perhaps? Well, that's a test of listening skills and memorizing 20 words a week. It's not even close to being a test of spelling. We would get together at the grade level and say, what do good spellers do? And we would list those things, and our test would look like that. Understanding rules of spelling, exceptions to the rules, employing the rules to fix misspelled words. Given text at their readability level, they would be able to identify which words were misspelled and fix them using whatever reasonable resource an adult would use to fix misspelled words. This is us laying our cards on the table, and that can be scary because it makes you vulnerable. The colleague with whom you've been working for a while might know the subject better than you, and it's hard to admit that when you've been teaching the same thing all along. But we have to take care to pay attention, to be focused on this, and kind of give some of that up. That idea of I don't want people to find out I'm a fake or barely a page ahead of the kids. We have to be very honest if we're going to be professional. So taking a look at the left, I'm not going to assume certain elements in the standard or the learner outcome that aren't really written there. For example, it might say, the student is able to analyze political rhetoric in speech or analyze how characters change as a result of conflict. It does not say when reading silently on grade level, the student is able to. We just assumed that. It was a part of an English course or maybe a media presentation course. I don't know. So I can do this. If it's read aloud, there's a much higher level of understanding, vocal inflection and tone, than when it's read cold and silently at first. Oh, so I have to realize those are two different standards. Reads on grade level silently and can analyze political rhetoric or infer author's meaning or whatever it might be that I'm assessing. I have to separate them out and not make the report of one really diminish the accuracy of the report of something else or get in the way of the accurate report of the first thing. Second little item there to remember is that I've got to look at all my test prompts and maybe give it to another teacher, a colleague, and say, look, am I assessing what I think I'm assessing? For example, in a math class, when you put word problems in there, you are way more assessing reading comprehension than you literally are assessing their understanding of the mathematics. So if I have a child who doesn't read on grade level, I've got to find out some way, figure this out, where I can make sure he understands the question, what's going on, semantics, whatever it is, and then let him go to the math, just launch right into it. This is you being totally evidentiary, making sure you can represent that. And it means you're going to be seeking patterns. In order to justify the line's path or to claim a line's path, what's the minimum number of points you must have? 2. Some point 360 degrees around it. How about to draw a parabola like you see in front of you, a curved line? Well, at minimum, 3 points, but to really solidify it, 5. So what you're doing is this. You're looking at your grades going, do I have a pattern? And what we have found is for the big 4 to 8 power leveraging learner outcomes, the most essential learnings that we do, we try to have 4 to 6 pieces of evidence on different dates. At this point, it's going to be hard to get all that in by the end of the year, but we'll try. For secondary standards, we might get 2 or 3 data points to make connections. And for the just nice to know stuff, there might be only 1 incidence, snapshot of evidence gathering in that, because school conspires against teaching and learning the way it's currently set up. So we approximate the goal with the most indicative learner outcomes of all. Then we're really careful about parsing out our verbs. When it comes to fact versus opinion, our little group decided they have to identify both, they have to be able to create both, they have to be able to revise both, like to revise opinion to make it more factual, and they have to be able to manipulate or persuade by using or not using certain strategic facts. That to us is mastery. We get together and decide what is evidentiary of excellence and what is almost excellence. Bounce your eye through these 3 examples, at least do one of them, if you will, and see that the first question is a typical one from middle school, high school level, but the second is what they're going to be asked to do in college. And what I'm suggesting is they need questions like the second one in addition to the first one in middle and high school. Take a moment, see if you see the difference. Yeah? So that means you come up with your definition. Now, look at where the white font ends. Anybody can be a good parrot. Anybody can repeat stuff. Look down below. There are 4 elements there that I've used no matter what subject I've taught, and I've taught many, many different subjects, as a rallying cry for real mastery. You can break it down to component pieces. You can explain it in alternative perspectives that have arisen cogently to other people. You can critique other people who do the thing that I'm actually assessing you on doing. And then you can use it strategically or purposefully in new situations. There's that agility, that versatility. We could break these down and explain, give examples of these, but the idea I'm trying to get across is more focused like this. Have an elevator speech. Have a go-to definition, a soundbite of what do you think is mastery, whether you teach PE or coding in Python or second grade or grade 2, whatever, whether you teach grade 12, it does not matter. Have a go-to of what constitutes mastery, and it will guide you as you try to figure out what is truly evidentiary. If you bounce your eye from the top to the bottom, you just see that this is surface area volume of three-dimensional solids. This gets more and more complex. Do you see that? Yeah. So let's say you all decide 7 different solids. We agree they'll do surface area volume of these solids, but somebody better say something like this. Well, those are all individual. What if we had a contraption where they are attached? Would a child remember to remove the surface area count from the interface where they attach to each other from the overall surface area? Or what if we double the length of one side? What happens to the corresponding volume? Does it double? Does it triple? What's that relationship? Rick, those are really weird. I know, but that's mastery. You've got to really delineate that out, not, well, I answered 30 out of 40 questions, so the math is 3/4. That's a 75. That's hiding behind the math. That's not rallying around evidence. And we're still going to rally around evidence when we learn at home. You might be asking, though, Rick, they've got the family situations. What if they don't represent evidence? They just don't submit stuff. Well, you're probably going to have to use whatever symbol you have for no evidence presented as of this calendar date. That could be a 0, an F, an NE for no evidence. I use NTY, not there yet. Other people use not yet, not assessed, no mark, something like that. They don't get credit for that material, but it's not listed as an unrecoverable F. But what does it really mean you're going to do? You're going to get real practical, which is what pragmatists do. You're going to try everything. You're going to sit with each other and go, okay, seriously, man, how can we get work to this child who lives 60 miles out? Whatever, I don't know, 75 kilometers over there. No, his parents aren't home. We can't go in the house. Wait a minute. They don't have Wi-Fi. So what are we going to do? These are some of the things I see schools all over Canada and the United States, and I'm sure some places around the world are doing to help a lot of those students. I'm hoping you might think critically like that and kind of get into that a little bit more for the evidence. And then we're mindful that it's formative assessment, not summative judgment. Summative assessment. Summative judgment is a better term because this is the final declaration of all you are. But formative assessment, oh my gosh, you're going to get critique and feedback and be allowed to revise in light of that and be assessed anew. So summative judgment, summative literally means post-learning. So we don't emphasize that. Problem in North America, most teachers emphasize the summative unit test. But the real learning happens with the formative. So there's a disconnect there. So what about like labs or anything that's hands-on as an activity of some sort? You have to decide, is this a safe place to wrestle that is low stakes but high feedback? So I can be safe wrestling, try to come to know, get critique, revise in light of that, and be a little bit better next time. This is how every single profession becomes competent. Every one of them is through reiteration like that and getting coaching in between. Awesome. We can do that. Or is this hands-on activity or lab or whatever you do that's like that? Is this the final declaration, the culminating application of all we learned? It's now summative. And now you can decide whether to count something a lot or a little. Every single assessment grading expert in the world will say formative counts 0. If you have to count at 5% to keep the political peace or something, some people do that. But the legit, if you're a purist in this, you would count it as 0. That would get incredible descriptive feedback. So it counts a lot. You can even put a homework and classwork completion rate on your report card if you want to, but it has nothing to do with what you actually know about this thing, that they were doing this as practice, or they were demonstrating final proficiency of it. You would never tolerate your earlier stumbling blind alleys, incomplete, intermittent success with something in the final evaluation of you in that something. It simply would be a form of distorting truth, and we're about accurate reporting. So we're going to be very conscientious about formative, summative. If a child gets an A on everything but does no homework, he still gets an A in the class. Look down below. The child does all the homework beautifully but bombs every test. I don't bump his grade up because he did all the homework. That's distorting the truth. We've kind of talked about that already. And then we're going to be mindful. I mark against whatever I'm reporting, learner outcomes, standards, whatever it might be, not the routes we took to get there. And you will see some down below. They're included, like participating in an online learning session from home, maintaining nice, neat notebook, and so on. Those are different from the actual outcomes. Some of you are graphic. I just want to show you that the more you put the formative stuff in a summative report, the lower its accuracy, but inversely, the greater ethical issues. Aye, here there be tigers, walk the plank. You don't want to do this. So I'm going to suggest separate real estate, formative and summative, to the degree you can. And just a reminder, in this next sequence of slides, there's no research that says giving kids zeros and Ds shapes them up and builds the self-efficacy, the respect for deadlines that we think they do. Grades are actually terrible teachers of that. So toward that end, I feel like I'm taking away something somebody might be used to using. So I'm giving you outstanding books on practical tips on what we know about how to cultivate kids to do homework, to complete things, to engage with learning at home experiences as much as you can. There's lots of books there, including learning about executive function, which is where we learn that stuff. It's right behind the forehead and the prefrontal cortex. These are the typical things we associate, the official things we associate with executive function. Every one of those we really need to use even more right now with the learning at home scenarios. I wrote an article on this if you're curious, but these are also wonderful books, Smart but Scattered, Late Lost Unprepared. My article is listed there down below. And when I do full day and 2-day scenario trainings on how do we build that self-discipline, that sense of caring about deadlines, respecting the adults who care for me, how do we build that stuff, that motivation into schoolwork? These are some of the things I talk about. I just thought I would say, look, if I can all help you and give you some recommended resources, go for it. But these are areas that I would pursue if you're currently interested in that. And toward that end, I just did a webinar on this exact topic when learning at home last week with a good friend of mine, Leanne Nicholson. So this is how you can get that webinar. If you want to sit for 90 minutes and see some of those practical suggestions, grab hold of it, run with it. It's available at my website, but also you see there the URL. And then a reminder, we're going to get hot and heavy into descriptive feedback, and we want to do so much more with it, but we're a little bit short of time, and I want to honor your time. We're going to do an entire session on it as you do this. And I'm just going to say this. You can learn without the grades, but you can't learn without the feedback and the assessment. Literally, sine qua non. And it's so important, we wanted to give it its own session. So you've got Susan Brookhart, Fisher and Fry, and so many other people who talk about this. I actually have 2 videos coming out by this weekend, animations on specific descriptive feedback techniques. If you want to take a look at that before you sit in on the session, that's great. It'll prime the brain, but it'll give you some really good operative ideas you can use literally right now with your learning at home situation. But notes coming up on May 13th if you want to join us for that. And then along with that, you would get into redos and retakes. Reiteration, we've emphasized a couple different ways already. And I gave you just some suggestions here of things that are unethical and knowingly falsify the report that are completely typical. And yes, I've done all of them in my career. So I invite you to walk a different path as I have had to do over the years as well. We'll talk more about that when we do the descriptive feedback. There's a whole thing on redos and retakes in my book, Fair Isn't Always Equal. The chapter was sent out to you, the rough draft of it already. So you should see some of those practical tips. Now, we've talked a little bit about this learning at home, but let's dig down, just really focused on that for a moment now. How do we do all this with our current realities? Well, I'm going to suggest this. By the way, this is where every single other assessment grading person, author, expert, consultant agrees. Nobody varies from this. And I'll also remind you that most universities and colleges agree with this as well, that given the diversity and the inequities that are out there, it means don't grade. That's right. At the very end, do not have a grade report, a percentage, a letter grade, a rubric number, whatever it is. It is unethical. Now you have to decide, the ministry says one thing, grades will be given. I get that. But to whatever degree you have a little bit of latitude of what is in that grade. For example, if we count this as the null set, we weight that 4th quarter or 3rd trimester as no mark. So we calculate the grade as of up to a certain point. If that is allowed to some degree, go for it. Many, many schools are deciding that they're going to go pass-fail. So Duke, Harvard, MIT, there's probably 10 new ones, big names that I see every single day in the news. They're going to pass-fail as well, and totally understand any admissions records coming from high schools that would indicate that. Some schools are doing this. This grade represents curriculum as of this date. It was a truncated curriculum to some degree, and they just report that. It was this grade, plus no mark, or plus a mark to this degree, plus a pass for fourth quarter. And it's literally how they write it on the report card, everybody understanding what's going on there. Now, I will remind you that a lot of people get into pass-fail, but they very quickly discern a third level. So some people are doing this: proficient, developing, no evidence presented. Okay, well, it might be mastery progressing. That's 3 levels right there. So that's a 2.0 scale, 210 technically, if you want to do that. But Ken O'Connor out of Toronto and Tom Guskey agree that this might be a better way to go: pass with distinction, pass or incomplete. And what they say is middle school and elementary only get descriptive narrative commentary, but this would only be used for high school because of such an urgency about letter grades if you have to. Many of them would say descriptive feedback might be the best thing you do even at the high school level as well. You're gonna have to decide what you're comfortable doing here. I have three reminders quickly. First, you're gonna have to define what is pass, and I would suggest you make it fairly demanding. What literally is pass? Is it? But very, very clear-minded. And then, as I mentioned before, if they go above and beyond, so that's the distinction one, I pull back from that. That's where I might part paths. You have to be very, very careful. You've calibrated it across all the subject-like teachers to do that, made the implicit explicit. And then remember that these are temporary at best. If we're given evidence down the road, for whatever family reason, they could present or learn even now, but they were able to do it weeks later, I'm going to give them full credit when they do it weeks later. Then, as you go through this, be mindful about the difference between assessment and grading. It is not inequitable to demand assessment of teachers and students all along. Assessment is inseparable from instruction. Assessment is our oxygen. It's vital, it's life-giving for all our learning. It's very low stakes, and we use different techniques for different learners. It's recoverable because you're gonna get feedback, be allowed to revise in light of that. We do it all the time, but we don't stop everything that's teaching and suddenly assess. Assessment informs instruction, instruction informs how we assess and what we do with that data from it. It's really integral, one to the other. Grading, however, is a report of what you know and can do at journey's end. So it's not daily, and it's not vital to the learning itself. It's not required. Usually, if it's a more conservative system, it's a very limited choice of options of how to do that reporting. As we do that, it tends to be very high stakes, not very often recoverable. And we want to make it very recoverable, which is less traditional, I know. We do it less often. So in the formative section of your grade book, there should be a lot of real estate, very little real estate dedicated to summative. And if you're in a school that says you have to have at least 2 grades posted per week, push back. Gentle insubordination, I'm asking you. What I would say to administration is, could you have teachers be required to do 2 status checks? Show the progression thus far. So we're keeping up, no surprises from mom and dad or the child. Everybody's self-monitoring where the child is. That's legitimate. But letter grades and final percentages are saved for only post-learning. After all is said and done, there is no more. So we do that at the end of learning's journey, not throughout. Because judgment, you'll find out when we do the descriptive feedback session, actually burns up. It diminishes critical error analysis. The student's investment, what they're doing, it invokes ego and self-preservation. And we want to preserve the instructional impact of that descriptive feedback. So join us as we talk about that. I'm going to kind of, in short and truncate this. Assessment is vital. Don't stop ever assessing. Please still do it. It is still equitable to assess. But the question is whether it's going to become a part of their permanent record. And that's a problem. Grading does become a part of the permanent record, unless you see grades, as I do, completely overturnable, and anything summative can be turned into formative anytime you want if it serves the student and his or her learning. So put this another way, we just said it, you can learn without grades, but you can't learn without assessment and feedback. Now, 3 quick cautions. If you're working at remote learning, so learning at home is happening, your first choice on instructional design can't be its ultimate gradability. Will this be easy to grade? And put in no. You do what is pedagogically, developmentally appropriate for the students you serve. You design really effective instruction, and then you find a way to really work on the evidence side of it. How do I gather evidence from this? So on a hands-on activity, how do I grade it? I would totally ask you, well, what outcome are you trying to assess here? Good. What evidence specifically do you need to see? Good, good. Now show me in this hands-on thing where you're seeing that evidence. If you can't, elicit the evidence, maybe through another vehicle or another product, as you can. Second, that's being principle first, actionable second. Second one is most families cannot keep up with synchronous learning. Just there's so many different variables for which we can't account. We're not in the classroom where we can control the variables. So most schools that are not losing their sanity have leaned towards or moved outright to asynchronous. I know you want the give and take to be able to read the body. I totally get that. But understand how inequitable it is. Now, what they're doing is they're saying, look, we will hold a few sessions that are synchronous, but I can't include student demonstration of proficiency during that time in the report card grade because it wouldn't be fair to the students who are dealing with emotional things, even though they're sitting there, they're distracted by all this going on around them, the death of a family or friend, or the mother or father is out of work, where's food coming from, all of that stuff. I might not perceive that, but it makes it inequitable nonetheless. So mostly synchronous, where they can do it when they finally get access to things. And then if you do synchronous, because you want connection, the human body so craves that, do that, but don't count that in the grade. And then you're going to have to really think about what are those essential learner outcomes. So this gentleman, what was that? Oh, you're eavesdropping, are you? Well, thank you. Exactly right. These are your essential learning outcomes. And I'm going to remind you of something. Most teachers next year are going to have to be intimate with the previous year's curriculum in order to be successful. You're going to have to go back and probably reteach the second half of the year because this has been so traumatic. They're not going to carry it forward. It's not, we frantically put things together. So we're not our best at our effectiveness at learning at home teaching as we do that. Totally get that. Well, here's the cool part. When you know the curriculum below you and the curriculum above you, you're so much better at teaching the current curriculum. You see what fits in the larger context and the foundations that were laid. You can make connections to that stuff. It's awesome. So even if you never had to do remote distance learning at home scenarios, you should know the curriculum before, under you, and the one that's above you as well. But I am going to tell you, if we are off next year as well, when you do distance learning, it takes longer to teach this stuff. And it's not as complete, not as solid, carrying it forward regularly. So I am going to suggest you think in terms of 2 years or more, depending on the student, to get back to a sense of normal and to recover the learning that was lost to some degree. I wrote down there 2 to 5 years. And what I was thinking is, it's this year that's a loss, or not a loss completely so, but it's really diminished to some capacity, as well as next year. And if vaccines truly take 2 years, it might go into the fall of 2021. I don't know that it will, but I just want you to be prepared for that, to think long-term. Now, what still works? So I'm gonna put it another way. Is there anything about learning while at home situations that precludes using some of the principles? Well, let's take a quick look. I'll let you read them as I just do a brief one-sentence overview of each one. This is about separating out formative from summative. Okay, not making those formatives high stakes. Then brainstorming out different ways to assess the same thing, not get hung up on whether they did it or not, but whether they represented learning. Still works. I'm going to confer with other people to decide what is evidentiary of all those levels, and then I'm going to make those proficiency levels very, very clear. I'm not going to be limited to my own creativity. What are 12 different ways to test pronouns? I'm going to figure that stuff out. And if I'm really wanting to get a catalyst and some fodder, universal design for learning is one of the great ways to go. It will really prod your thinking. I also wrote an article on teacher intellect and creativity. If you want to go to the website and look at the article section, you can check that out. It's a way to kind of charge that up. If you're like, no, there's only 1 or 2 ways to assess. No, there's actually a lot. Let's get into that a lot more. And maybe let the kids decide what would be a good way to assess. And then I'm going to realize they learn at different rates and not get bogged down on the school calendar. Got it? I'm going to make sure I'm cultivating students, not sorting students. And I'm mindful not to conflate the report of one thing with the report of something else. I'm still going to disaggregate. I'm going to do less curriculum per standard, or per report. So what that means is on quizzes and tests and projects, I'm literally going to write out the learner outcomes that I'm assessing. And they're going to get a separate score for each one and not one overall aggregate. And there's lots of ways you can do that with the setup or electronic gradebooks. If you'd like some suggestions on that, let me know. And then I'm still going to focus on what the students can carry forward and do independent of all assistance. So I might ask them to demonstrate something 3 distance learning sessions down the road, or 4. or weave in some element of a previous standard in the representation of a new test or project they're doing to integrate that in, and they'll get a separate report on that. Okay, I can still do that. I can still identify evidence for different levels, rally around it, and make sure the kids have some practice analyzing exemplars of different proficiency level. No child should ever wonder, how do I go from a 1 to a 2, a 2 to a 3, a 3 to a 4? No parent should have to wonder, because remember, this is about clear communication. I can still do that. I can still see a pattern of performance over time, not just one. Okay. I can use multiple descriptive feedback techniques. Again, that's coming your way very shortly. The videos this coming weekend, and then the session May 13th. I can do redos, retakes after relearning, as long as they do the relearning and we enter into kind of a contract about that. Totally set that up. I can understand interval science and stop doing zeros in the 100-point scale. I can actually have a minimal F so it doesn't skew when I'm forced to still do central tendency. Again, I'd be glad to send you more articles on that. One I co-wrote with Ken O'Connor, if you're curious. Here's another one. I can study research on human motivation, executive function, and self-efficacy, and use those things instead of relying on grades to try to motivate the kids. It's far more effective. The kids mature faster and more solidly. I can realize about communication, not compensation. I can choose to be fair, equitable, which means I'm not going to get bogged down in how they represented the learning or how they learned it so much as what they do represent in their learning. Got it. And I'm going to think outside the box. If there's a different way to represent it, but it's the same evidence, I'm holding them accountable for the same learning, I'm still in this. We can still do it with online learning. And don't forget, I'm going to be doing on May 7th, a differentiated instruction for ERLC, a webinar just on how do we differentiate instruction, tiering lessons, that sort of thing. And then I can still hold on to the reminder that kids can hit targets they can see. So I can be very plain, very transparent from the get-go. You're going to be asked to answer these questions. You're going to be asked to create this, not play guess what's on the teacher's mind. I can still get up to speed on test design. How do I design test prompts that actually elicit the evidence of the standard or the outcome that I'm trying to assess? Yeah, I can do that. And then more schools are now moving to e-portfolios that follow the student. So the student creates this collected works. So I didn't get it on this timeline, but maybe some point next year, I actually represent learning from the previous year. That goes into the portfolio. And the earlier transcript, we might want to leave the historical record. Yes, as of this date, he was here, but now he has demonstrated full proficiency as of this date. The portfolio follows the student through all 3 or 2 or 4 of the middle school levels, or the 4 or 5 levels of elementary primary grades, or all 4 years of high school, or 3 years of high school, whatever it is, it just follows you. So this is your science e-portfolio, your math e-portfolio. And because we're trying to integrate multiple years curriculum into 1 year, it works, it carries forward, but teachers have to be comfortable probably for the next 2 to 3 years in keeping up with this. I'll just tell you, a lot of schools that go to e-portfolios really, really do like it. And the kids own their learning. They rally around the learning. Instead of saying, if I got 4 more problems right, I could have like a B. They're like, if I could understand area of 3-dimensional solids, I do get perimeter of 2-dimensional solids, but now I got to get like surface area of that, or area of just even 2-dimensional ones. They're talking about the learner outcomes. They're talking about learning, not gaming the system. It works quite nicely. We can talk more about that if you like. And then, warning, shameless plug coming your way. I need to build my repertoire of how I assess kids in general. And I got to tell you, summarization techniques that you start collecting over the years are awesome assessment tools. Well, I just had a book come out last year with Deidre Stafford, and we did like 60 of these, plus you can expand them. So it's probably 130 maybe different possibilities in here. But for every one of them, we put a tech application connection that you can do. So the majority of them really work well with learning while at home. So I'm going to recommend it to you. And if anybody has this book and wants to photocopy a few and send it to their colleagues, that's fine. But I'd be glad to talk to you more about it. We could do a whole session just on summarization if you'd like. By the way, it also makes a really good way for students online to process their learning while learning at home. So if you're looking for some really creative ideas and some traditional ones as well, they're all included in this one book from ASCD. Okay, end of the shameless plug. Then, kind of wrapping this little part up, you've got all these different apps, and probably every week there are 10 new apps as well. But these are ones I see teachers using over and over again around the world that seem to really help with the assessment side of things. So if any of these will work for you, what I try to do when school is regularly in session, and it's a normal year, is I try to learn 5 new apps every year. That's my goal every year, and I've kept up with it. I'm going to recommend you probably learn 3 or 4 here at the end of this year. Just familiarize yourself with it and see if there's any chance that you might be able to interact with students on it. And I bet you could add to this list so beautifully. You could just be fine with that. I love Screencastify, for example, because I could circle different things on the product. We get the videos right there, and the vocal, my voice, the tone, everything. I'm talking. So now the parents and the child has recording the feedback given. And what they do is they can move the mouse, the cursor over any assignment in the software, on the electronic gradebook, parent portal, parent view, whatever you might have. And a little text box pops up with the link to the Screencastify, maybe to online tutorials, to the evaluative criteria, to my specific feedback. It works really well if we're about communication. We're in the world we used to dream about. It's actually a good time to be a teacher. But wait a minute. How do I know they're not copying? They're not cheating when they do the online stuff? I know. Well, guys, got to tell you, that's a part of the descriptive feedback session on May 13th. We're literally going to talk about why do kids cheat, plagiarize, copy, and then what is a constructive response, and how can we minimize the cheating that might happen while online? Know that that is coming up. Don't miss it. It's just pretty timely, and it's probably in the top 3 of the things that concern educators most. So it's coming up. Don't forget that. I gave you a little reminder of it here. If you would like to get a preview of some of that, I did write an article on cheating and plagiarism. We sent it out earlier today. You're welcome to read that. We're also welcome to go to rickwormeli.com/articles. Grab it yourself if you didn't get that sent out to the registrants earlier today. But know that session's coming. Now, what's definitely challenging? Developing a unified field theory that accounts for gravity and physics. Yeah. Getting students, okay, all of us off our phones for long periods of time. Yeah. And finding toilet paper. Yeah. Okay, what's pertinent to this? Well, finding time to get enough evidence to constitute proficiency or pattern thereof. It's going to be hard. It's a short, truncated time we have with students. Second, equitable access to content online with the students, given the homes and the diversity in those homes. And then equitable support, resources, and sleep. A lot of people are experiencing, I'll just go to the next bullet, are experiencing anxiety, panic, depression levels, and suicide is just skyrocketing in a lot of different regions in North America. There is way more abuse happening because people are home that really probably shouldn't be home for all those hours. And people don't always have the skill set to navigate this when so much is at stake and happening. So there's lack of sleep, there's the emotional trauma, even though they look fine, there's something happening underneath. So that's really hard, totally get that, and we have to address that. What's also challenging, the limited teacher training and assessment designs, and then preparing for long-term doing this. And then administrators that might require a grade, or a ministry that might require a grade. I'm hoping that somebody can talk to the ministry, the premier, and maybe change a little bit of that. I also, in looking at your documents, they say they can do other subjects as possible, but I'm going to suggest something to you. We need fine performing arts and PE more than we have ever needed them. They are the ways we will survive intact. And if we don't emphasize that in what we're providing kids, we are remiss and we are going to regret it. And when we come back, eventually we come back, there will be so much we have to sort through before we can get to the actual learning. It is through fine and performing arts and physical education and those passions that so many kids find meaning and belonging and a voice. Don't diminish that. So locally, even though I see the ministry is not promoting that as required, I'm going to suggest maybe you could make that a focus and an emphasis to not leave your communities behind that way. And then anybody that might require provincial testing, thankfully, the ministry has deleted that, has canceled that, and they're returning funding to those who've already paid the fees for the April testing. That's awesome. And then mandated calendars, we have to fit everything in. I got to get a grade by this one point. Go ahead and do that. But tell students and each other it's overturnable, totally recoverable as necessary. What else is hard? Well, sort of. Requiring kids to demonstrate proficiency when they're doing like mock trials or some group project. But man, go online. They can do books discussions. They can do performances live or asynchronous or whatever, but they can do debates. All that stuff you can still do, and you can still assess. So there's very creative ways. I remind you, one of the things you might want to do is not limit your students to your sorry imagination. I had to learn that myself. I just want to kind of get out of their way and let them run with it. So I sometimes will turn it over to students to say, look, I want to do this cool thing. I wonder if you three could come up with a way that we could still do this, even though it's virtual, or we got half the class virtual, but half the class is like, you know, they don't have access to that. So is there a way we could figure out how to get them involved in this? They will rise. They will surpass us. If we're worth our salt, we should be looking for kids to go beyond us, not be equal just to us. Society would stagnate, grind to a halt. And then these are the people on Twitter I find the most practical, who will respond to you. If you're on Twitter, if you're not on Twitter, it takes 30 seconds to kind of involve. But wow, besides politicians and news reporters, educators are the third most intense users of Twitter. So these are people on assessment and grading who would really help you look at research, practicality. There's a number of Canadians in there as well, not just Americans here, where I am in the States. And then down below, look at all this. These are the people whose websites. There's Ken O'Connor right there. You've got the Canadian Assessment Learning Network. You've got, oh my gosh, Alberta Assessment Consortium right in your backyard. Avail yourself of that treasure house that's there. I've actually been with them before. And then Joe Feldman, the second one up from the bottom, that's the guy who talks about grading and equity. So if you're concerned about social justice, you'll want to take a look at Joe's book on that, or at least those resources there. You see the Alberta Assessment Consortium down below. Then Ken O'Connor sent this to me, and I thought it might be helpful. In Illinois, they came up with a draft of what they're going to do about assessment and grading and learning, and it's actually pretty decent. So if you're looking for some language to use to maybe send out, or just for your own pedagogy philosophy in your own classroom, I think there's some good ideas there just to kind of get you through the end of the year. I put it there in front of you. And now, my favorite books on this that provide the practicality. Left one, we just described. Right one is about standards-based classroom for people who implemented it and what that was like for them. The left there, what we know about grading. This is 100 years of research. What can we claim from it and what can we not claim that some people are? Tom Skusky, Susan Brookhart edited that. And then if you have special needs children, the one on the right is for you. Can I just tell you that regular ed gets benefit from it too? I love that. But basically, it's how to assess and grade IEP or IPP students, RTI and ELL. Then the one on the left, we already briefly mentioned, it's about how to motivate kids, all those different models we've heard. The forward to that book on the left is unusually well written. I'm just saying. The one to the right is Ken O'Connor's latest. Wonderful, very practical. The one on the right here is the book in which I have based our conversation today. The one on the left, we've already mentioned. And then these just came out, and I'm halfway through them. They're awesome. They're great. They seem really practical. But just in case you're looking for something that is 2020 proof, so to speak, I recommend these. And then this one, I'm really proud of it. The first book, the foreword was written by Alfie Kohn. Some of you know his work. And they came to me to write the foreword for the second, the revised one. But this is a series of research articles on de-emphasizing testing and de-emphasizing grading. But notice who actually edited it and pulled it all together. Joe Bauer was a good friend from Red Deer there in Alberta, internationally known around the world, just thought the world of him. And some of you might know him. He passed away in 2016. And he was the one that kind of reached out to me with Paul Thomas and said, would you write this forward? And I was just so honored to do it. But you've got an incredible wealth right there in Alberta. And I don't want the other provinces, but they're listening, I know. But I think they have such a wealth that they could probably be a leader for all of Canada. And I haven't seen in the provinces that I visited, which is all really except for the Quebec area, but I've done Maritimes, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, of course, Alberta and others. I think Alberta probably has the best organized approach to assessment, although I've seen some great documents from Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Manitoba. But I would say you've got a lot to help to offer those other provinces as well. I hope the provinces listening would avail themselves of something they have in their Canadian backyard.
Okay. Well, Rick,
questions, go.
Sorry. Okay. So we've got about half an hour left for some questions. So if you do have a question, please type it into the chat box and we'll try our best to get to it. Bailey is asking, how do we begin to break the habit of doing school for kids who are good at and have been rewarded by compliance grading? And in her experience, this brings up a whole crop of anxieties that are a bigger battle than the teaching and the learning, because it's not just a transition for teachers necessarily to assess differently, but it's also going to be a huge transition for students. So
I mean, you're changing the rules of the game. A lot of kids are used to buffering their grades. They're not with things that are not indicative of evidence. I brought an extra tissue box or Purell bottle, so I should get extra points. I tutored younger children. Do I get extra points for this thing over here? And that's just an indoctrination, which means it's fixable. It's changeable. It'll be small steps that they really, once they get into descriptive feedback and owning their learning, they will develop a self-efficacy. What we find today is that so many kids, particularly with social media, if they post something online, if they don't get like 7 likes or 17 likes within 5 minutes, they wonder what's wrong and they enter a depressive state because they're overly reliant on external validation. I only have value in relation to my grade or my test score. And when we actually emphasize self-efficacy, executive function skills, students come way around. They turn 180 degrees on, oh, I'm responsible for my learning. So for example, one of the things we do when we do descriptive feedback is we emphasize decisions they made and the outcome of that decision, because decisions are very changeable. They're not set in stone. Whereas if you talk about quality of a product, that's very judgmental and evaluative, and kids enter that panic zone. So when we talk about feedback next time, which is also talking about why do kids panic cheat, we're going to answer that question more thoroughly with how do I get kids to own their learning and not be relying on other people to tell them what they're doing and realize they have all the power in the world that they can change it. They made this decision, they like it, make a different decision and go for that. But they have to have relationship with the teacher. We can't just tell kids to do it. We have to spend time. And I don't want to hear this, don't bother me with the touchy-feely stuff. We don't have time. You really do have time. And one of the things we found lately, and it's just exacerbated because of the while learning while at home, a lot of kids are not participating on it because the teachers never develop relationship. So we can do very specific things to build that mutual ethos where I'm looking out for you, looking for me. And you are not diminished because you didn't know how to do something. And so I'm going to let you recover. There's always going to be a way that we assess and grade to engender hope, not to say, okay, it's permanently unrecoverable and there's no hope for you, which creates that negative downward spiral. So I'm hoping you'll stick with it. And maybe if you can't participate, you'll at least get the recording of it. Sorry, that's such a truncated response.
Okay, we've got another question from Alex. How do you suggest separating students from their privilege? I know that living situations are far from ideal, but the fact remains that they still have not met the outcomes regardless of the different vehicles used. So Rick, I know you earlier had mentioned that it's hard to get all the kids that with the synchronous learning, and that asynchronous is sometimes part of the solution, but also all the suggestions you had mentioned.
Yeah, I had a full slide there, and it seems like an article comes out every other day on, here are 5 new ways you can get access to kids who aren't there. So I'm going to direct you to look at that slide to try to get rid of the privilege as affecting the learning. But there's 2 aspects of that privilege too, right? There's one is, lack of privilege, the lack of access or whatever you want to call that, and the intersections of my life. Does that prevent me from learning it legitimately? But then about expressing that learning, the manifestation, the evidence for it, 2 very different things. And you might need to attach them or attack them separately as you do that. So the idea that the school division would allow me gas money. I know money's very tight. That's a bit of a joke, but we try. Will allow me gas money to drive to a student's house in time to do that, and maybe have a conversation. Maybe it's only once a week, maybe it's twice, where I can do the back and forth and maybe a little bit of assessment, or at least set them up so I feel like they have a running start and then come back, so that privilege is no longer getting in the way of that. You would have some of those privileged things already happening back in your school if it was really going to be that influential. It's just become even more so, rather dramatically. And it's actually laid naked, revealed some of these really terrible things that are going on where privilege is getting in the way of access to learning and the demonstration of learning thereof. So start with those things that are there, where we literally bring out modular, temporary Wi-Fi for 4 hours for a house way out, far beyond anywhere there's normally Wi-Fi. The student is able to download, upload. We go to local businesses and we ask for digicorders or something very similar to that, where we actually put on a little DVD, whatever it is, the stuff, or on a flash drive, and we send it out there, and the kid has it for the duration of this school year. I mean, there's things where we have to think outside the box to whatever degree we can. And I know that a week into it, that device might be damaged in some way, and it's irreplaceable. I get that. I need to be prepared for that as I work with the people who donate those things. I totally got it. It's an imperfect situation run by imperfect people. But what's not acceptable is not to brainstorm and make the effort, and to bring up privilege pretty much in every single conversation. So the idea is that when we're sitting down with other teachers virtually going, is this representative of this child's privilege, lack thereof, or not? How do we take that into consideration as we decide whether or not it's pass fail? That's why literal letter grades and percentages get really awful real fast, real inequitable, and a more global pass fail is probably the only decent way to go that's ethical and mindful of that. And even that can be inequitable from time to time. I know we're short of time, so I'm going to stop the answer there. But if you want to talk more by email, you've got all these ways to contact me down below.
Right. And I think it also becomes a conversation with students, whether the focus is on their personal growth, on whether they are getting better from where they started versus the academic progress, because that's different, right?
Yeah, I'll agree.
Okay. Another question from Fleur. For grade 12 students who are applying for scholarships, any idea if a pass will be okay or if they will need authentic grades? So what would your answer to that be?
Well, I keep up with Chronicles of Higher Ed and Education Week and other journals of higher education. And I've been talking to a few admissions officers around the nation. Every one of them, uniformly, all of them have said, we completely understand. And we're struggling with that ourselves. And this is not just in North America. These are universities around the world, Oxford, others. And they have said that they understand if there's a pass-fail for this one marking period, that they will take that in consideration, whereas there might be a grade for the rest, or if there's a grade pass-fail for the entire year, or some school districts that are so financially strapped and geographically way spread out across the long land that they just say, we close school down, it's a truncated curriculum, but at the moment we close down, he was heading towards passing, and so we're giving him credit and arbitrarily saying he gets the diploma and he gets the full credit for the course. Please understand, this is a generation of students coming to that did not have adequate schooling. And every university admissions officer has said, we get it, we will be able to identify. And I will tell you that primary feeder high school divisions, they usually have somebody, for instance, you got a lot of people going to U of A, University of Alberta, whatever campus it might be, or McGill or Simon Fraser in another province, or whatever it might be. You will get people who are experts. They know that school division in Calgary, Edmonton, Grand Prairie, Yellowknife, Lethbridge, Red Deer, Medicine Hat, Mighty Peace River, or whatever it is. They will absolutely know that. And they will say, oh, okay, so we know where the curriculum is here. They do things like an A in this division is like a B in this division. They can make that calculation. So I think you should err on the side of what is legitimately appropriate for the health and for the accurate reporting of the students you serve. And if you need to recalculate something so it fits in a particular university's method, so they don't prejudice that student as a candidate for their freshman class, then I think that's legit to do. For example, very few universities, it's the minority, really require class rank. But those that do, we can calculate a class rank. We don't normally do that, but we can do that if it would help the student get in. This is that time of flexibility, but I think you're probably okay going pass fail.
Okay, Amber is asking that you had mentioned a bunch of books and articles about motivating students to complete assignments, and Amber is looking for specific ones for high school. Can you name your top 3 that she should read to motivate high school students?
there is so much out there that crosses over that. The Motivational Breakthrough by Rick Lavoie is really good. He works with kids with learning disabilities. It came out in 2007, but it is outstanding for regular ed as well. And then I would say all those books I put there, the covers, Larry Ferlazzo. He's probably the most prolific writer in Ed Week and on Twitter. And he writes books about English language learners, practical books on that. And the other series of books he has is how do you get kids to motivate themselves? And all three covers that I put in the handout are lesson plans on how you get high school and middle school kids to own their learning, to really stick up for it. And I would start with those to get going. And then the last one I'll tell you, and this is pretty much for all levels, K-12, but wow, does it work, is the instructional cha-chas. I know, like the cha-cha, the dance, the cha-cha-cha, cha-cha, like instructional cha-chas by Leanne Nicholson, the one we just talked about where I did that webinar with her last week. She's spot on good on this. She's got another book called Deeper Learning. She wrote with Eric Jensen. You might recognize his name as a cognitive scientist and a researcher. But the instructional cha-chas, Larry Ferlazzo, and Rick Lavoie books are probably great places to start.
Okay, thanks. Ron's got a question. We have divisions that are saying we can't lower student grades,
right.
But we can have them raise their scores. But you say that it is unethical. So what do we do?
Oh, yeah.
And is it equitable that students who did quite well in the early units get to keep their high scores and can then ghost their classes for the rest of the year? Thoughts on accountability?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question, and it's going to be imperfectly resolved. So just accept that as first, because school's not set up to do the wise and ethical thing. So I'll just make sure we're very clear on this. Many schools are doing now. You cannot fail the last quarter. It's just, you will pass no matter what. But what they're saying is this: if you participate with the online learning and you demonstrate the new learning, you could actually raise your grade if it was once bad. And I'm calling that into question as an inequitable practice for those who do not have access to that. So if you're going to be bound to the one calendar date, they have to express evidence, and there's no chance to recover from it, I think you're doing wrong in that regard. It's an unethical thing. If, however, you could do the grade, but then you simply tell the parents, the kids, and you make it a real policy, it's actionable. Hey, totally. Over the summer, even next fall, if you come back and you learn the stuff, and we will work with you, we'll be your advocate, not your adversary. We'll work side by side. We'll help you. We'll go back and change the transcript. Now, I have not found a school division in Canada, the United States, or around the world that doesn't have a procedure to submit a form to change a grade from a previous marking period. Now, you might have something new set in stone of which I'm not aware, but most schools have a capacity. Now, if you did that with all 185, which is my normal student load when I'm teaching in the classroom, if you did it with all 185 every time, people could be frustrated with you. Totally get that. But right here, right now, we've got to decide what we want to do to finish out the year. So I am going to suggest you might need to swallow it and say, we are going to be inequitable, but we're going to put these things in place to resolve that, to remedy an injustice in the longer term that we cannot do right here. And that might be the way that you kind of get through it and save your sanity. I would beg you to find some mechanism where you can have a caveat and not do that for whatever reason you might come up with. And I'd be glad to brainstorm some of those rationales with you if you like via email.
Okay, Annette is asking, some schools are literally taking the grades that cannot be changed going into the final quarter. So for example, if a student was at 16% pre-pandemic, that grade will never change, rather will only get a pass fail or at the end of the final quarter. And so what can she do or what can this person read to approach the conversation? So it's having that conversation to try to advocate changing this.
Okay, you're gonna have to clarify, Susan, maybe you can do this or you can have the person do it. A 16% out of 100 going into the final quarter.
Right, so
and
some
is that
schools
considered absolute failure?
Yes, that
Annette,
would be.
Thank you for saying yes, I see that popped up.
Okay.
Okay, so that's it. So you would say, what if they could start learning it and they should be allowed to have that stuff count to raise their grade? Is that what you're asking? To raise it beyond the 16%? Right. So it's no longer permanent. So again, at every possible turn, we can engender hope of I could actually learn stuff and be given credit for it. And people will realize I'm not just a slow person, that I'm actually carrying, I matured up, or I developed cognitively to the point where I can now engage in my own learning and invest in it. If you could put a situation in place to do that, please do it. She's asking for resources that she could read. And I probably would say the work of Tom Guskey, which is, and Matt Townsley. Those are two different websites that are on the list of responses there, that the list of resources. But Ken O'Connor, who's one of the big ones in CAFLN, so the Canadian Assessment Consortium Learning Network, he would be a go-to to say, here's language other provinces have learned. And I would absolutely reach out with an email to Ken and say, here's the dilemma, what can I read that speaks specifically to Canadian provinces? And you can mention that Rick Wormeli sent me, and he will smile and know exactly who that is and be fine, because we talk about this a lot. That's the best I can do right here, right now for you, but you were spot on that we want to put those procedures in place where the kid could rise if he could rise. Now I got to ask, at 16%, that is such a skewing amount if you study interval science, that it would be like 7 or 8 perfect hundreds in a row if you still have to do an average just to get up to like a D level, like the 70s or something. So it would probably be insurmountable. So I would just say anything below a 50 is called a 50, because that's an absolute F. You don't need to have gradations or degrees of F-titude. So it's so hard to overcome. I've written about that, so has Ken O'Connor, and I would be glad to send you those articles should you ask.
Okay, the next question is coming from our live stream. Gordon is asking, mental health issues are such an issue now more than ever. How do we get kids beyond being in crisis to being back in a mode of engagement and readiness for learning? So I believe that the webinar that you shared, that all participants in the session received, would have answered some of those questions.
Absolutely. Okay. But what I love that he said is that mental health is a big, huge part of it. Not all teachers are comfortable with that. So the idea that we see it as part of our dedicated duty, yeah, and the myriad of all the other things we're doing, when you don't have any sleep at all, I totally get that. But that we do try to open ourselves up to whatever little bit of insight we can get on mental health and take that into consideration. Even students who are academically strong going into this shelter in place are crumbling. And we cannot assume, and our normal interaction has to be different. For example, I don't ask students, hey, are you okay? How you doing? I usually say, are you good enough? Or something along those lines. Tell me about your time. What are you looking forward to? What's something that you miss? I mean, something just so I acknowledge that, and that we're in this together, we're sharing the path together, is huge. For teachers to assess and grade blind that would actually be unprofessional and unresponsive, not yield and not live up to the promise of what we tell people we do.
Okay, we have another question. In kindergarten, the outcomes often require us to sit with students one-on-one to assess their mastery. For example, can they identify the letters of the alphabet and associate with sounds? In our present remote learning situation, we could still assess that using video and flashcards, but often we can hear parents whispering responses to their children. How do we navigate this challenge?
Okay, well, it's a perfect example. I am going to be talking about that in the session on feedback and cheating, just so you know. But very, very quickly, more and more schools now, and I've actually done this too, are doing training sessions for mom and dad. And we have a little conversation ahead of time that there's no help to their child or their parenting if they bail the child out. So parents don't have a manual of to what degree is too much helicoptering, and what degree is too much assistance versus just right. And I play that dad-parent card a lot. Look, one parent to another. What's the greater gift we give our kids? And I got to tell you, if parents know that the learning is not going to be a part of a permanent record and held against their child, they're way more open. But they have to trust you that when you say, look, I'm just trying to assess where they are so I can teach them properly. If you say anything, if you point to anything, it's not going to be accurate assessment. It would be like you stepping on the scale, or something, or lifting the kid up off the scale when you're weighing your child. You would want to get an accurate weight so I could give your child the right medicine. If I change the dosage based on a different body weight, I've made your child sick or I've not helped your child. So you are getting in the way of the very thing you crave. Most parents operate from anxiety and fear, not a place of knowledge. And if they begin to trust us as knowledgeable professionals, but then we also give them some tools for coaching, and the videos coming out this weekend and the session next time will give lots of ideas in that, then they begin to back off and let us do our jobs. So to the best degree you can, there's innovative ways to do it, but also have a separate conversation with mom and dad or send some advice home. Here are 10 things you can ask and say with your child as you're working with him or her that would be so much more supportive of their real learning, not their fake learning. They'll know it now, but then they don't know it down the road. Why would you set your kid up for that? So it's something you might need to do.
Right. For kindergarten and Division 1, I would almost say that you're also not just teaching the kids online, you're teaching the parents.
I would agree.
Right.
We have that here in Virginia too.
Right. Okay, we've got a question from Jennifer from our live stream. Many high schools just started courses in February. And how do you suggest handling assessments for classes that were not at the final quarter when the pandemic closed classes? Because their semester would have just started at February with only a month in before the pandemic struck.
Right. This has become a difficult thing. And most schools are doing this. If you got 2/3 or 3/4 of a class and they arbitrarily choose their ratio, they're counting it, the class is done. You get credit, if they have to do that sort of thing. If it's less than that, so they literally close, and I don't know when your semester is, whether it's January or February or March, the schedules are all over the place. But if they do it and they just barely had a week or two in, they're going to claim the class was not taken by the child. No credit is given. So that means that they are scrambling to find distance learning versions of the same class that they could substitute in to qualify for the credit for the course. And the child will have to take that now and over the summer in order to get credit for the class. Or literally, they're going to have to take it next year. Now, you've got all kinds of, like, what if they're a senior, whatever it is, and they have to graduate. Some schools have chosen to do an intense academy. So it's 2, 3, 4 weeks all day long. They're taking a class. And to that degree, they are saying, we will now count it, and you take a test at the end. We'll count it as credit for the course. But that runs into accreditation issues. And I'm not really sure how your ministry would feel about that, if it would be sufficient enough to demonstrate the learner outcomes required. Now, some of those classes, they sit down, they put on their big boy, big girl pants, so to speak. And what we do is we do the hard, heavy lifting. And we say, look, the most indicative ones are these 4 to 8 and maybe these 15 secondaries. So if we get all those across, nomenclature, taxonomic reference, quantitative, qualitative analysis, writing expository paragraph, compare, contrast, essay, whatever it is that we feel is just so fundamental, the biggest boulders, we'll count that as the course. So sometimes they're able to do that virtually and online to count it. So my advice is it really depends on where you were, and I have to look at the individual situation and whether or not there was any distance capacity to take that course or something equal to it online. But I will also tell you, some across nomenclature, taxonomic reference, quantitative. What some have just said, we're going to let it go, and we're going to say you graduate even though you didn't have the course. The course was listed as one of our requirements, but it's really not that critical to you launching into your life, and we're not going to prevent you from going to university next year. So we're not going to count it. But if you're, really grade K11, then we have a little more maneuverability, and it might be required that we do a special summer session on those classes.
Okay, well, that concludes our time for today. So I just wanted to highlight, so if you have any additional questions, we're going to display Rick's email at the very end, but I just wanted to let you know, everyone will be receiving a copy of the recording today so that you can review many of the slides and the resources that Rick had mentioned during this session. And I wanted to highlight our upcoming one for next week on May 7th from 2 to 4 4 p.m., differentiated instruction principles and practicalities, and also the one on May 13th for practical descriptive feedback techniques and ways to minimize copying, cheating, and plagiarizing. On behalf of URLC and the Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortia, thank you very much to Rick Wormeli for sharing his expertise. And we definitely hope to see all of you back joining us on May 7th. So thank you very much. And here is Rick's email in case we didn't get to your question. So those of you on the live stream, it's rick@rickwormeli.onmicrosoft.com. Thank you, and we hope you join us next week.
Just if they lose that at all, just go to rickwormeli.com. They can still get a hold of me.
Great. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for your questions, too. Now, there you go. Bye, Christine. Bye, Susan.
Bye, Rick.